Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Bellwether District Community Meeting of the year. We'll get started in just a moment. We'll wait for a few more people to join before getting started. Thank you. Hello, good evening. If you've just joined us, we will get started in just a few minutes. We're waiting for a few more attendees to join. Thank you. Good evening. If you just joined us, we're just waiting a few more minutes for a few more attendees to join us. Thanks for your patience. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first Bellwether District Community Meeting of 2024. My name is Mia Fioravanti, and I'm on the Corporate Affairs team here at the Bellwether District. As always, before we begin, I'll just share a quick reminder of how we will conduct Q&A tonight. We encourage you to enter any questions you may have in the Q&A throughout the meeting, but we'll be taking all questions following tonight's presentations. When we get to Q&A, if you would like to ask your question live, please raise your virtual hand and my colleague Corey will give you the ability to show your camera and unmute your line. Please limit live questions to one per person so we can give everyone equal time. We'll also be limiting each question and answer to 2 minutes so we can get through as many as possible. We'll take as many questions as we can until about 7:15 tonight. If we don't get to your question, as always, we'll post responses to both answered and any unanswered questions to our website following the meeting. I also want to share that tonight it's our first meeting of the year, and so we'll provide a general update on the project, but in future meetings, we'll aim to dive into a particular topic that we know is of interest to all of you. So as examples, in the fall, we held meetings on traffic mitigation. We held another meeting on our flood study and stormwater management. And so if you have topic suggestions for the remainder of the year for our Q2, Q3, and Q4 meetings, please enter them into the chat or share with us after the meeting via our contact form at thebellwetherdistrict.com. Next slide. So moving into tonight's agenda, our team will provide an environmental remediation update, a development update, and then I'll close with an update on our community and workforce development efforts. As we've done in past meetings, we want to begin tonight's discussion by sharing how the Bellwether District project will benefit our city and region over the next 10 to 15 years. In total, I'm sorry, Corey, thank you. In total, we expect to invest over $4 billion in the cleanup and redevelopment of the site. Over the long term, we project $100 million in annual tax revenue for the city and $120 million in annual tax revenue for the state. We're also making a number of community and workforce investments or initiatives, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. This includes investments in internships and pre-apprenticeship programs, scholarship funding, and support for local organizations with a particular focus on South and Southwest Philly. According to our latest economic impact study, we're projected to add 19,000 permanent and 28,000 construction jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. And we're making significant investments in reconnecting the site to the neighboring community, LEED certified buildings and other green infrastructure, and of course, demolishing and remediating the former refinery site. Next slide, Corey. Thanks. Also want to share where we are in the project timeline. So we're substantially complete with decommissioning and demolishing the former refinery. In fact, we're about 99% way through that work. As you'll hear tonight, environmental remediation activities started before our ownership of the property and will continue throughout the project timeline. From a development perspective, we're currently in phase 1 of vertical construction. On our industrial or logistics campus, we just broke ground on our first building last year, and we expect building 1 to be complete by the end of 2024. And then on our northern or innovation campus, earthwork began just a few weeks ago, and we expect construction on our first building to begin in early 2025. And last, you'll see we're continually focused on communicating to and engaging with local community throughout the project and past. If you've joined us for past meetings, you've likely heard us refer to these overarching sort of goals for the project. This is a site that has been walled off from the community for a very long time because of its prior use. So our team is very focused on reconnecting the site to the neighboring street grid, creating new internal streets, and increasing opportunities for public transit to the site. We're also, very focused on creating new green pathways throughout the Bellwether District. Over the course of the project, we'll plant thousands of new trees and plantings, build protected bicycle and pedestrian pathways throughout the campus, and construct on-site stormwater management infrastructure, which you may have heard us talk about in our November 2023 meeting. And last, we're looking to construct the site with sustainability and climate resiliency in mind. Just by the refinery closing, there was a reduction in the city's carbon emissions by 16%. We're also raising the site out of the 100-year floodplain and buildings out of the 500-year floodplain. And we're planning to build as energy efficient as possible with LEED certified buildings and other green infrastructure. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Juliana Connolly.
Thanks, Mia. Good evening, everyone. Corey, you can go to the next slide. So I like to start each of these updates with just a quick reminder that there are 2 what we call responsible parties at this site. So there's ourselves, Hillco Redevelopment Partners, or you'll also hear me refer to us as PESRM, or Philadelphia Energy Solutions Refining and Marketing. It's a long name. That's why we say PESRM. PESRM, or PES, as you may know it, is the entity that owned the refinery at the time of sort of its end of operation, and that HRP acquired out of bankruptcy. We are one party that's responsible for some of the contamination, for cleaning up some of the contamination that's at the site, and then Evergreen or Sunoco remains responsible for certain contamination. And the easiest way to think about it is really contamination that was released to the environment, so to the soil and groundwater, before September 2012. That remains Sunoco and Evergreen's responsibility. And then contamination that occurred after September 2012 is PESRM, or now HRP's, responsibility. And the reason that date is important is that is the date that the refinery was sold from Sunoco to PES. So that's the importance of that date. It's not the date that HRP acquired the property. That wasn't later until 2020, but we have taken responsibility for that contamination that did occur from September 2012 onward. So that's the easiest way to think about it. There's a couple of additional things that HRP is responsible for, which is sampling beneath all of the storage tanks that you may remember used to be present at the site. They're largely gone now, and we have sampled beneath the vast majority of those tanks. We will sample beneath all of them. We're still doing some of that sampling now. We're also responsible for management of all the soil that gets moved around the property, and I'll talk more about that later. And we're also responsible for assessment of what we call vapor intrusion into the new buildings that we'll construct on site. And what vapor intrusion means is that the air that's in the soil can move from the underground into the indoor air of buildings. And if that air has chemical contaminants in it, we need to make sure that those contaminants don't make it into the new buildings where people could breathe it. So that's the process that we call vapor intrusion, and that is something that we will be responsible for assessing and mitigating at the site, because we will be building the new building. You can go to the next slide, Corey. So I mentioned there's this time divide of pre-September 2012 or before September 2012 and after September 2012. So far, we're aware of 7 locations at the property where releases to the environment did occur after September 2012. And these green stars that you see on the aerial photograph in front of you show those locations. This photograph is not what the site looks like anymore. All of these tanks have been removed, but they sort of help provide context about where these releases occurred. And all of our regulatory submittals and documents that we prepare related to these releases are posted to the website, and the bottom bullet here shows where on the website you can find those documents. But so these are the 7 areas that we, PESRM, HRP, is taking through Pennsylvania's Act 2 land recycling program. You can go to the next slide, Corey. So this table just summarizes, again, those 7 release areas. You can see the date that the release occurred, the type of cleanup that we're doing, and sort of the status of each of these release areas. The largest of these is the 3rd row in this table, the area we refer to as the UDEX release area. This is a release that occurred in 2018, so prior to HRP's ownership, but we have picked up the remediation of this area and have implemented a new remedial technology called soil vapor extraction. Not a new technology in terms of remediation technologies, but new to this remediation area. And on the next slide, I'll show you the progress we've made with that system. So it's not important that you can't read all of the details on this slide. What's important here is the graph that's showing the line that you can see here. And what this is showing is the volume or the amount of oil or contamination that we've removed from this area of the site. And so you can see that remediation system is continuing to make progress and remove contamination from the ground, from below ground, and we'll continue to operate that system essentially until we've removed all of the material that we're able to from that area. You can go to the next slide, Corey. So as I mentioned earlier, we are also responsible for management of soil that is moved around the site. We do need to relocate soil at the site to facilitate the redevelopment. And you've probably heard us talk about before that that some portions of the site, sort of in their existing condition or their condition at the time that the refinery was shut down, are vulnerable to flood hazard. And so we need to increase elevation in certain areas of the site to address that. And we can do that by relocating soil at the site. At this site, because of its past use, that soil is contaminated, or some of it is contaminated. And so before we started moving soil around the site, we prepared what we call a soil management plan that documents a number of things, including the fact that we will sample the soil before we move it. And so all of the soil that is currently being moved at the site was sampled before it was moved, so that we know what the chemical concentrations in the soil are. And then based on those concentrations, there are different sort of rules about where the soil can be reused. And so we know all of that information in advance, and we have people out there watching, environmental professionals who are trained in this type of work, watching the construction work to make sure that the soil is moved to places that is appropriate based on the sampling that we conducted. And so the photograph that you see here is just a typical type of photograph we get from our environmental consulting firm that is out there watching the soil every day, making sure that the soil is moved in accordance with the sampling results. You can go to the next slide. And then the last thing I'll talk about here is during that soil movement, we do have the potential to generate dust or to generate volatile organic compounds, and we want to make sure that we are not impacting the surrounding community through the movement of that soil. And to make sure that we're not adversely impacting the community, we have 6 air monitoring locations set up at the perimeter of the industrial campus. You've heard we recently started work in the innovation campus, which is to the north. We've added 4 additional monitoring locations. I'll talk about those at the next quarterly meeting probably. So we now have 10 sort of around the perimeter of the property, and these monitoring locations measure dust and volatile organic compounds. These are chemicals that have the potential to be present in the air. We measure those continuously, and we get alerted if the concentrations start to increase, so that we can take mitigation measures. We can take action on site to bring those concentrations back down before they get elevated in a way that would be disruptive to the community. These data are they're presented in monthly reports that are also available on our website, and you can see sort of the location on the website on the bottom bullet. And that is the last slide I have, and I will hand it over to Blake to give a development update.
All right, thank you, Juliana. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I'm Blake Rowan on the industrial team here at the Bellwether District. I am going to review the master plan framework that we've established over the course of the last 2.5 years, as well as the progress that we've made on the logistics campus that we're excited to share. So if you go to the next slide, just to reorient everyone, if you're not aware of the location of our site, it's 1,300 acres in Southwest Philadelphia. As you cross over the Platte Bridge onto Penrose Avenue and look northwest, you'll see our industrial campus. And as you go along 26th Street onto 76 North, you'll move on to our innovation campus. So as we looked through a clean slate development, as we completed the vertical demolition, we really took a step back and tried to think, what could we do to best reorient this site into Philadelphia? And we bifurcated 2 different areas of the site that we'll show you on the next slide. So as I mentioned, we have our innovation campus at the north. That's roughly 250 acres out of the 1,300 acres. And we have a handful of folks from our team today that will talk through that. And then we have our logistics campus that's just south of Passyunk Avenue, which is represented by 750 acres out of our site, approximately 10.5 million square feet, and representative of 10,500 full-time positions at full build-out. So if you go to the next slide, run through the logistics progress. Go one more slide, please, Corey. Thank you. So as Juliana mentioned, we started earthwork in May of 2023. We started with the subgrade demolition within the areas. If you look in the image here to the right, it's the blue shaded area under the industrial campus. So we've started earthwork within our lots, what was previously known as lot 15, 16, and 11, which are shown just on the new spine road that goes through the site. And we've begun to work our way south down to the Girard Point area of the site. So since May of 2023, we were excited to complete the site work associated with lot 15. And we are actively working on our lot 16 or lot 2. As you see, if you're driving down 26th Street, you may see a crane working on deep dynamic compaction, which is prepping us for our second vertical building. And then we are actively working on our lot 11. We have our largest stormwater basin constructed there. And it's already handling our water intake throughout the site. So we're excited to show you that on the next slide. So this is a very nice aerial photo that shows our future Hartranft Street, our future Francis Harper Drive, and then our first two building pads. Lot 15 or lot 1 that you'll see, that had the surcharge pile that was improving the subgrade of that lot on in this rendering. We have now made additional progress that we'll show you through. And then just north of that is our lot 16. That building pad has been constructed and is ready for vertical construction following the DEC process. Go to the next slide. So this aerial shows the proposed new Hartranft Street that goes across our full site. Just north of the left area of the site is our lot 11 pond, that L-shaped pond. That is our main stormwater basin that is holding the water on the north area of the site. Just south of that, we have another outlot 2 that's been constructed, and we are actively working on the building pad for lot 9, which is about a 900,000 square foot warehouse. Go to the next slide. So a couple fun figures to date, just to put in perspective how much progress we've really made since the start of demolition and earthwork activities. So we've removed approximately 69 miles of below grade utility and refinery pipe. That's following the almost 900 miles of above grade refinery pipe that we removed during the vertical demolition phase. We've also removed 23 miles of utility pipe that's existing water, sanitary sewer that was serving the old refinery. And we've also decommissioned and removed about 46 miles of underground refinery pipe. JDM is our earthwork contractor. Following the removal of those subgrade obstructions, they've moved approximately 650,000 cubic yards of soil on the site, along with lot 11's basin and a few other outlets that have been constructed. We now have stormwater volumes that can handle up to 30 million gallons of new stormwater capacity that was not on the site a handful of months ago. One of the things we're really proud about is most, if not all, of our material that we are removing from the subgrade, we are recycling. So any of the existing underground utilities, we are recycling, which is amounted to about 4,700 tons of metal. That's through the end of February. We're also actively crushing the existing concrete structures that were on site and intending to reuse those during the construction process. To date, we have about 61,000 tons crushed. So if you go to the next slide, in order to obviously reintegrate our site to the existing roadway network, we are planning extensive infrastructure improvements. We've gone through those in the past. We're excited that we are moving forward with those. We've hired BSI Construction, who will be managing that project for our first phase of infrastructure. Some of the key facts of that, we have about 3,700 linear feet of new roadway and utility work to do, about 3,100 of new off-site work. So that's improvements along 26th Street, the new intersection at Hartranft 26th Street, as well as improvements at Penrose and 26th Street. All of that work is scheduled to get kicked off here in the second quarter of this year. We're actively working through a final contract with BSI to allow them to get started, and we've commenced on pre-construction meetings with both the city and state local officials. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, our first phase of construction on the industrial campus, as most of you know, it's located on the northeast portion of our site. This is 2 buildings, both speculative warehouses. In total, it's about 1 million square feet. If you go to the next slide, we'll show our first building. So this is a conceptual rendering of what you're going to see in the very near term. We are now calling this Lot 1. Previously, it was known to be Lot 15. This is a 326,000 square foot warehouse. It is currently designed and permitted by our contractor, Clayco. We have excitingly mobilized the contractor towards the end of February. They've begun digging and pouring foundations over the last 2 weeks. And then as we approach the early part of April, we'll intend to start erecting the first precast wall panels on the site. So very excited. We're making a lot of progress. This building is intended to be fully erected and ready for turnover by the end of this year. You go to the next slide. So this is a rendering of our Lot 2, formerly known as Lot 16, that we showed in some of the other pictures on previous slides. This is a 726,000 square foot warehouse. To put it in perspective, it's well over 2 times the size of the first building and approximately 1,800 linear feet long. So a very large industrial building. We've executed an agreement with ARCO, who is the design builder that will be constructing this building. We are designing that building, and we actually just submitted for the building permit on Monday of last week. So we are moving full steam ahead. We're targeting to commence vertical construction in the latter part of the second quarter of this year or early part of the third quarter. We've begun to start releasing some of the longer lead time materials associated with this building. And then ARCO is going to focus on their subcontractor buyout process to get everyone ready for vertical construction. So I think that's it on the logistics campus, and I'm going to pass it over to the innovation team.
Thank you. So hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. My name is Amanda Mazey, and I'm part of the mixed use development team here at HRP. And we're excited to share with you our in-progress plans for the first phase of redevelopment on the Innovation Campus. Next slide. So just a reminder for everyone of our master plan for the Innovation Campus. We're proposing 3 to 4 million square feet over 250 acres. And our first phase will be focused closest to the existing infrastructure and up against 76. Next slide. We are excited to announce that we have begun subsurface demo on the Innovation Campus earlier this month in March. And we will then begin mass grading in April with a target completion of the end of this year. This slide shows an overview of Parcel A, where the majority of the earthwork will occur. And this is looking east towards the city. You can kind of see Center City in the background, and then also 76, which is highlighted. Next slide. This slide shows a similar view looking east with our phase 1 plan overlaid on the parcel, showing the outline of our first 3 buildings, buildings A, B, and C, and the main roads of our initial campus, Jackson and Fortin Way. The earthwork in this phase will include movement and placement of approximately 615 100,000 cubic yards of earth with 500,000 cubic yards of material to be ultimately relocated to bring elevations up for floodplain resiliency. We are also contracted to remove approximately 71,500 linear feet of known underground piping, which equates to approximately 13.5 miles. Based on discovery of unknown pipes thus far, this number will increase exponentially as we move forward. We're also planning to recycle approximately 5,000 cubic yards of concrete, equivalent to 13.5 million pounds or 6,700 tons. Next slide. This slide shows work up against 76, which many of you may have seen lately if you were driving by us. Next slide. And this last slide shows additional work happening interior of the site as we demo existing concrete retaining walls. Next slide. So zooming into our phase 1 site plan, we are planning for approximately 500,000 square feet and 3 buildings with surface parking and 2 main roads, Fortin Way and Jackson Street, with loading and service drives hidden from the main streets behind the buildings. We're very focused on creating an urban campus feel with active and passive uses. We are designing to focus attention on lots of landscaping, central courtyards, dedicated two-way bike lanes, protected sidewalks, and on-street parking. Additionally, Building B in the middle will contain campus amenity space with a fitness center, conference rooms, a cafe facing a large landscape plaza to the east. We're focused on large-scale landscape moves, such as our central plaza, to improve the site and integrate bioswales as our key stormwater management strategy, which also serves as a design feature. These are not only integrated into the circulation of the site, but serve to shield the parking from the buildings and break up the long building facades. Next slide. We're also planning for off-site improvements in phase 1. This slide shows a zoomed in of Vare Avenue along the east of our site, which borders 76. We will be converting this portion of Vare Avenue from a current one-way street to two-way to increase circulation to and from Passyunk Ave up 28th Street to our newly created Jackson Streets. We will be using area from our site to increase the existing right-of-way width along Vare Avenue to build new landscape, bike, and pedestrian accommodations. Next slide. This slide shows the existing condition of Vare Avenue, which today is very poor. This view is from the vantage point of a driver on 76. Next slide. And this next slide is a conceptual rendering of the future condition with the addition of glare strips on top of the barrier to shield the headlight glare from the newly created two-way traffic, because now the cars will be facing each other. So we want to make sure that that doesn't cause any driver interference. And we're also adding new landscaping on the expanded barrier between Vare Ave and 76. Next slide. And then here's another view of the existing condition of the barrier, this time from the vantage point of Vare Avenue. Next slide. And another conceptual rendering showing the future condition where we plan to expand the right-of-way and add a two-lane bike lane, pedestrian sidewalk, street trees, and landscape to soften this edge. Next slide. Finally, coming back to our phase 1 site plan again, I want to walk everyone through some of our conceptual renderings for the buildings. Next slide. So this first conceptual rendering is of Building A, which is located on the northernmost edge of our campus. We're very focused on a highly designed exterior with a mix of glass and metal panel concentrated at the corners where the main lobby entrances will be located. Next slide. This next conceptual rendering highlights Building